Hello, everybody. Can any of you hear me? Good. Oh, yes, being close to that is woo. Right. So, Katie, you may need to be this close. Welcome to the Business and Economics Forum. Last in the series of Business Can Combat Climate Change, which we've been running all year, starting first of all with Professor Tim Jackson, his post-growth economics, leading through lots of helpful talks from local authorities who will help assess your business and give you grants towards making them more sustainable, through Rob Delius's excellent architecture talk relevant to you guys, and then to Jeremy Key Pugh's talk on the Abbey and how they have promised God and Bath that they will be carbon neutral by 2030. Enormously ambitious considering the size and the number of times they need to heat that space in a day. But today we have the absolute denouement of that, Katie, Head of Sustainability at the RUH, who is going to tell us how they are meeting that enormous challenge. How could a hospital ever possibly be sustainable? But she says they can, so let's hear how. Please put your hands together for Katie Fremantle.
Thanks very much, Vicky. Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Katie Fremantle. I'm the Sustainability Manager at Royal United Hospitals in Bath. And I'm here to talk to you about what we're doing at the RUH in terms of sustainability challenges, opportunities, and the projects that we have achieved. So just to give you a little bit of context, the Royal United Hospitals estate is a 52-acre site, about half a mile from Bath city centre. It's got 627 beds and over 4,000 rooms, and it employs over 4,800 staff, so nearly 5,000 staff. It serves an area of almost 80 square miles. So that's from Malmesbury to Glastonbury, north to south, and Devizes to Weston-super-Mare. So that's east to west. So quite a large area. In terms of its energy consumption, we're looking at quite a large amount. So both electricity and gas, around 17,000 megawatt hours a year, and gas 56,000 megawatt hours a year. Now, this may mean nothing to you. To break it down, it's effectively the equivalent of around 10 5-bedroom family houses running their gas and electricity per day. And if you look on the map, you'll see that there are a little bit more than 10 buildings on site. So it sort of equates, you can make your own mind up about that. Also, I've put in our annual carbon emissions from 2022 to 2023 financial year. Our direct emissions, those emissions that we're totally in control of, we're sort of emitting around 13,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide a year. And all the rest, our indirect emissions, is around 55,000 tonnes. So it's quite a lot more. So lots of guiding and influencing needing to be done in this area as well. So in terms of the vision that the RUH has, the slogan is where you matter. And as this might imply, this is about people. People are the priority at the Royal United Hospitals. Ultimately, it is a public service for public health people. So this diagram on the right-hand side is effectively a sort of infographic which shows who we really want to be targeting in terms of our strategy going forward. So we want to look after the people who come to the hospital and make their life as pleasant as is possible. We want to also look after the people in our community. So looking at the sort of wider area of Bath and see what influences we can have on the people in Bath. And then also, very importantly, of course, the people who work at Royal United Hospitals, doctors, nurses, estate managers, etc. So really what we want to see is how does sustainability fit into all of this? Because I'm talking about people. So where does sustainability fit in? And what you could say really is that the initiatives that we put in place for sustainability at the Royal United Hospitals could be considered to give social value. So, for example, we have e-cargo bikes, e-bike scheme, where we loan out electric bikes for a month at a time to our staff members. And this will encourage perhaps them to go and purchase their own electric bike and commute to work in a slightly different way, perhaps alternatively to the car. Also, we ran a campaign earlier this year about sustainability champions. Now, a lot of organizations will usually have a sustainability champions network where maybe 1 or 2 people in one department will sort of champion sustainability and run the sustainability aspects of that department, be it switching off lights, computers at the end of the day, closing doors, etc. But we realized that actually a lot of these people will do it almost alone, and it will be difficult to get momentum from the other people in the departments. Also, it can be really daunting for people who don't know very much about sustainability to sort of get on board and start working with sustainability, even in the smallest possible way. And ultimately what we wanted to do was to encourage that everybody can do a little bit of something. It's not got to be perfect, and that can be anything from walking to work once a day, or even planting their own vegetables, trying out a tomato plant in their kitchen or something like that, something really small, which might give them confidence to then take bigger steps in the future. So I will go ahead of that. So the point I want to make on this slide really is that sustainability is involved in absolutely everything that we do at Royal United Hospitals. We have to look at it from an estate's point of view. So when we're looking at managing our energy, we have to look at it from the delivery of care. So for example, digitizing doctor's appointments, making sure that people can get to the hospital without using their car, for example. And that's quite a big area of focus in our sustainability strategy going forwards, and is being looked at actually at the level of the integrated care system, which is one level above the trusts. Also, we have to look at sustainability in terms of financial management. So, for example, we can't just put forward a sustainability initiative because it's fantastic for the environment. We need to look at how much it costs, and we need to look at the social implications of that project. And these basically make up the 3 pillars of sustainability. So sometimes when something seems like such a no-brainer in terms of project, we might look at the finances of it, and it might not quite work, or it may need to be looked at in a different way. And I'll talk about a few examples of that in this presentation. So while sustainability at the RUH may not sort of be very showy, or we may not put out very many comms about what we're doing, things are happening behind the scenes. And really, if you want to look at it from an estate's point of view, you could say that the initiatives that we're implementing in terms of, for example, putting solar PVs on roofs, or putting better windows in, for example, are all efficiencies. And it's quite a nice way to conceptualize sustainability to somebody who may not be too familiar with the terms of it. We've also recently had a survey done of our trees, ecological survey, which is funded by NHS Forest, which is looking to see if we can plant any more trees and get any more canopy cover on the estate. So that's now a report, and it will go to our estates officers, who will then implement it if it is right for the estate. So when we're looking at sustainability, particularly in the NHS and at the RUH as an acute trust, there are various different guiding pieces of information that we can call upon, which have been put together by NHS England. So you might have heard of, but don't worry if you haven't, a sort of big document called the long-term plan, which is effectively planning out absolutely everything with regards to the NHS for the next number of years. And within it is a pretty small paragraph about meeting net zero goals. But it is important that it's there, and it's good that it's been acknowledged. And perhaps in the future, there might be a little bit more information on perhaps an update of it soon. The biggest sort of push towards sustainability in the NHS really is something called the Greener NHS. And this sits in NHS England and is a sort of department within NHS England, if you like. And through this, we've been given lots of guidance in terms of our strategies, what we need to focus on, because as a sustainability team, we don't have all the knowledge in terms of clinical requirements for materials and things like that. So sometimes they provide us with guidance in terms of how to deal with that sort of thing, how to talk to procurement, what materials might be used, and it's just very, very useful information. And they have given us a framework with which to create our sustainability strategy, which is now called the Green Plan. It used to be called the Sustainable Development Management Plan. The one at RUH is currently in review at the moment, but will shortly be out. And this is basically a 5-year plan with targets for net zero for 2045. That's for the entire carbon footprint, as well as lots of different initiatives in terms of so clinical sustainability in the clinical environment, green spaces, that sort of thing. So it includes a lot of good information. Hopefully, I mean, when it is published, it will be in the public domain, so you can have a look at that. And then, yes, so for example, perfect example of where the Greener NHS has provided us with some good guidance is the recently brought out net zero building standard, which really just helps people working in estates to be able to measure and manage their carbon emissions, where there perhaps is less knowledge than we've got quite a knowledgeable team at RUH, but it's an absolutely fantastic document to look through and get ideas from our point of view. In terms of networks and sort of people we can talk to get information, we have, as I was talking about earlier, the integrated care system. This involves, for Bath, RUH Bath, there's 2 other acute trusts. So there's Salisbury Hospital, and then there's Great Western Hospitals in Swindon, and then a couple of primary care institutions which are local to. And together we have meetings, and we can call each other up and send each other emails and ask us information about sort of how they might have put together an initiative, implemented it, challenges that they might have come across, and they're fantastically supportive there. I'm actually going to visit Great Western Hospitals tomorrow to do exactly that. Also, we work very closely with our local anchor organisations, mainly brought together by Bath and North East Somerset Council. So, for example, the universities, both Bath Spa and University of Bath, fire service, police service, and various other institutions that escape me right now. And again, we come together, we present on projects that we're really proud of, and where people can learn from what we've done. So I'm just going to take you through a little bit of context around where we are at the Royal United Hospitals in terms of our journey to net zero, our carbon footprint, and then I'll talk about some projects that we've been doing. So I don't want to assume that everybody knows carbon accounting. So this is a tiny little sort of peek into that. So this diagram is actually from the NHS guidance documents, and it basically shows how we organize the data that we use to calculate our carbon emissions. And it is in, as you can see, scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So scope 1 and 2 are together, and they are the things that we can directly control. So they're things like electricity, so you can switch off the light at the end of the day. Gas, you can switch off the heating at the end of the day, or you can switch it on. So that's gas is scope 1, for example. Scope 2 is electricity. Scope 1 also includes various other things like petrol for estates vehicles. Again, you could buy an electric vehicle instead, or you could walk and not use your vehicle, or use less mileage. And of course, oil for our generators and boilers. So scope 3 is a much, much bigger beast, if you like, and it's our indirect emissions. So we can't directly influence these. The only thing we can do is guide our stakeholders, let's say our suppliers, and perhaps our teams who deal with them. So our procurement teams, for example, perhaps putting policies in place to be able to ask our suppliers to then show us how they are managing their carbon, for example. And we are in the process of putting something together at an NHS England level at the moment. The same is for social value. So we want to be our suppliers to be able to show us that they can deliver a certain percentage of social value in their tenders that they come to us with. It also includes various other things like travel, etc. But I will show you a diagram with all of this in it in a few slides' time. Oh, just one last thing. You'll see that there are some chemicals up the top there, CH4, NO, N2O, SF6, etc. All carbon footprints are reported in carbon dioxide equivalents. So that will mean that we will have calculated how much of those chemicals have been produced, but then they will be converted into carbon dioxide, which is why it's a carbon footprint. And so we usually have E at the end of it, i.e. carbon dioxide equivalent. So this is our scope 1, scope 2. So these are the emissions that RUH has for our financial year 2022, 2023. And we can directly influence these. So our carbon reduction target at RUH is for our direct emissions to be by 2030, and for our indirect emissions to be by 2045. And we'll talk about those indirect emissions in a sec. As you can see, the big blue area is our gas consumption. So we use a lot of gas at the on the estate, and this is because a lot of our electricity is also generated from that gas too, via a huge throbbing machine called a combined heat and power plant, CHP. And yes, so it's 80% of our supply chain. So that's the big elephant in the room, if you like. That's what we've got to deal with. And we have put various things in place, such as a heat decarbonisation plan, to be able to look at addressing that. And I'll talk about that in a sec. And again, as I was talking earlier, there are social and financial considerations that need to be made when addressing all of these things. And also, sorry, anesthetic gases are our second biggest emitter. So there's a project that I'm going to talk about later, which is to do with that. So looking at our indirect emissions, scope 3, I hope you can see that. But as you can see, there's an awful lot which is based around medicines and chemicals. And I would say pretty much half of that was, half of it is also supply chain aspects. And then, of course, we've got sort of around a third of it, which is regarding travel. So all of these things, really the best way to sort of start tackling these is stakeholder engagement, trying to get people around a table, talk about what our targets are, asking them what their targets are, if they have any, see whether or not they're willing to sort of, innovate a little bit, and deliver their product in a slightly more efficient way, perhaps. But we do have influence, and we work quite a lot, especially with the council, in terms of our travel. So we actually have a shared resource coming into post who's going to sit in Baines, but will be shared across anchor organisations for Bath, for the coordination of travel across Bath, which is really exciting. And it will also enable us to be able to focus on other projects at RUH. But we're in conversations with a variety of different organisations to see if we can perhaps just make the travel situation a little bit easier in terms of getting to Bath, using the bus, timetables, frequency, availability, etc. So there's lots of work going on around there. I just thought I would graphically show the proportion of indirect emissions against the direct emissions that we are having to look at in terms of reducing our carbon footprint at RUH. As you can see, 20% is direct and 80% is indirect. So, and this is not a shock for most organizations. This is the reality. It's the same for everyone. University will be the same. Just scope 3 is a lot bigger. So in comparison, I just wanted to do a quick sort of benchmarking exercise. So we're just comparing Royal United Hospitals against our other acute trusts in our ICS, so GWH and Salisbury. We're not looking great in terms of our carbon footprints. So we have the highest one. However, I wanted to show you a little bit more data to perhaps sort of contextualize that. Again, this is a breakdown of what we've just seen against all various different aspects of the trust and where emissions come from. Again, not looking fab, but I wanted to show you the energy consumption per meter squared, but then also per patient against a variety of different trusts in the local area. And you'll see that, yes, Royal United Hospitals does have quite a lot of emissions per meter squared, or energy consumption per meter squared, but actually per patient, it's quite far down the spectrum. So it really depends on how you're looking at the data and how you want to communicate it. You can make it look terrible, you can make it look okay, but it's just a sort of useful exercise really for context. So in terms of our carbon emissions reduction trajectory, I've put a little graph here. It contains data from financial year 2016-17 all the way up to the most recent financial year. And you'll see it was looking wonderfully sort of downward trajectory looking. And then, of course, it's gone up a little bit this year. And there are reasons for this. So what I also wanted to show you was the blue line, which shows a carbon reduction trajectory. Now, this is really, it's a planned trajectory. If we followed a certain plan that was put together a few years ago, with current political and economic circumstances, the finances to enable this may not necessarily come to fruition, in which case the line will look a little bit different. It absolutely depends on the decisions we make, what's best for the estate going forward, really. So it might sort of flatten a little bit at the top and then go down quite sharply at the end. But we do have, that is our trajectory, and that is from our energy management plan. So our current decarbonisation projects that we're doing, this is really relating to our direct emissions. So as I was saying, and as you saw, gas is the elephant in the room. It's absolutely massive. We've got to deal with it. So we worked with a consultancy to put together an incredibly detailed heat decarbonisation plan. And this involves everything from putting solar PVs on roofs to changing the entire infrastructure practically of the estate to accommodate for air source heat pumps. Again, we need to think about the wider implications of that. The cost of it is pretty substantial, and the electricity capacity required for the site to be able to support it, it needs to be thought about as well. So there are lots of different sort of projects that need to be done before we can even start breaking ground on that if we wanted to. Anesthetic gases. So we are currently decommissioning our nitrous oxide manifold. I'm going to talk a little bit about this project in a minute, but this should have a significant reduction to our footprint, which will be fantastic. And then we'll be looking on to the rest of the anesthetic gases that we use on site. But this should really make a dent in our emissions going forward, which is very exciting. For our fleet, we have about, let's say, 20 diesel vehicles for our estates fleet, and they are slowly being changed into electric vehicles. We've put in 9 electric chargers at the moment, and they are free to use for those estates vehicles. So we just hope that that transition will happen over the course of the next few years. So for electricity, we're encouraged to source our electricity from renewable sources. I'm not too sure if you might have heard of something called a Renewable Energy Guarantee of Origin, otherwise known as a REGO. This effectively is a piece of paper that tells you that the energy that you have procured is come from renewable sources. Now, it also costs an enormous amount of money to buy this piece of paper or to get this piece of paper. And sometimes it's worth looking again at perhaps turning that focus, financial focus, to a more permanent decarbonisation measure. So there is there's a balancing act there, especially in terms of the RUH looking at forward financial projections for energy as well. Yeah.
In terms of the fleet electrification, are you looking into like the source of the electricity? Is it going to be from lithium, or are you considering solar energy?
Specifically for the electrification of
The fleet, yeah.
of the fleet. At the moment, we haven't got that far. We will likely be sourcing our electricity from the grid. We will, with the heat decarbonisation plan, we'll be putting in solar PVs, but again, solar, the proportional generation of solar energy is likely to be sucked up by the hospital, and so we'll need more electricity from the grid anyway. But it's interesting, it's a very interesting point that you make. Thank you. And then last but not least, refrigerant gases are a tiny little bit of our direct emissions, but they are important. They have a very high global warming potential. However, technology in terms of their, finding any sort of alternative is very nascent at the moment. I've looked at a few academic papers. Rather like hydrogen technology at the moment, it's just not quite there yet. So I think that's definitely something to look at for the future. So project number 1, medical gases, decommissioning of our nitrous oxide manifold. So our nitrous oxide is what some people might call laughing gas, and it's sort of helps people to relax when they're going into surgery. That's all I know, and I'm not an expert at all. But ultimately, it's originally it's been piped around the hospital. Literally, there is a pipe that takes it to various places where it's in need. For example, the theatres, where they perform operations and they need it for their patients. However, as you can see, it is 298 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So it's a hugely, hugely destructive greenhouse gas. And there are obviously, as you can see, various institutions like the Royal College of Surgeons, and they're really on it, the Royal College of Surgeons, who've basically said that really needs to be limited, its use needs to be limited, and pipes need to be decommissioned. What we find in a lot of hospitals is that there are some leaks in the pipes, and therefore you may be procuring lots of gas and finding that your surgical team are like, well, we only use it once a week, you know, what's going on. So there's work to be done in terms of maybe seeking out where those leaks might be, or doing an acoustic survey to see if there are any leaks in the system. So anyway, at RUH, we decided, or actually it was the theatres team that decided to do this, which is absolutely the right way to go in terms of any kind of clinically based sustainability project, because of course they know what they're doing, and they know what they're going to be using it for and how they want to use it on a day-to-day. So they decided that they wanted to switch the delivery of the nitrous oxide gas to cylinders on trolleys, and they could just like tow them about the operation department. And they procured the kit, they made sure everything worked, and they then put together standards of practice and risk assessments, etc., and got the process working for a good 3 months before anything was done about the piped nitrous oxide. Because of course, who knows who's using it, who isn't, who knows about this project, who doesn't. So it was really, really important to make sure that their standard of practice worked and was pretty bulletproof before we even touched the nitrous oxide manifold. Good to know that everything has been fine. We've capped off the outlets on site, and we are currently decommissioning, waiting for parts, etc. So that will be done in the next few weeks, we hope. And as I said before, there's a potential to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from this by around 40%, which is fantastic, really. So keeping the momentum up in terms of anaesthetic gases, I've tried to push conversation in terms of looking at our NTNOx manifold. So NTNOx is basically gas and air for, and it's usually used in maternity. And as you can see, it is 50% oxygen and 50% nitrous oxide. However, there's a lot of research that's come out recently that NTNOx, ironically, found to impact B12 levels in staff who are exposed to it on a sort of daily basis, and it can lead to miscarriages and other B12 deficiency issues. So it's a issue there, and we're trying to find ways in which we can still perhaps use it, because we don't necessarily want to take gas and air away from mothers. So trying to find a way in which we can reduce the exposure to people who live with it effectively day in, day out. So there are there's a technology which has been spoken about quite a lot. It's called a mobile destruction unit or a central destruction unit. They do the same thing. What they do is the mother will inhale the gas and then exhale it into the mouthpiece, and it will be scavenged into pipe system and broken down, cracked by this machine, and into nitrogen and oxygen, which are harmless atmospheric gases. So it's quite an effective machine. So at the moment, we're doing a trial of a mobile destruction unit in our maternity department, and we're just going to see how that goes and if it works for us. If it doesn't, GWH have just installed a central destruction unit, so that's a sort of stable in a plant room thing that does the same thing. So really it depends, it's very sort of subjective to the logistics of the place that you're implementing the technology. So step by step, we'll see how that goes. And also we'd like to conduct an acoustic survey to see if there are any leaks in our current NTNOx system, because of course really we want to continue to use the manifold, but we just want to deal with the end product really. But if there are leaks in the manifold, we've got to deal with them as well. So that would be what we would propose to do. So yeah, GWH and of course Newcastle, I think they were the first NHS hospital to use an MDU. That's why I've referenced that there. Something slightly different now. And dealing more with our indirect emissions. We got some funding from the Healthier Futures Action Fund to and WECA, West of England Combined Authority, to put together a e-cargo bike trial. And this involved effectively West of England Combined Authority providing us with an e-cargo bike and asking us to put together a trial with a couple of our departments at the hospital for a year, see how it went, and then maybe if it worked well, we would either purchase the bike or they could roll it out in other NHS trusts. So this has only just started. We've used very kindly, our children's therapies department have volunteered for the trial, and all is going well at the moment. Yeah, I mean, really, it's all about sort of influencing how people travel, how one can deliver the service in a environmentally friendly way, keeping cars off the road, and really encouraging active travel amongst our staff as well. So it's a sort of win-win in terms of environmental and also social there. And of course, financially, it's not costing us anything at the moment. So that's good.
Visiting children.
Exactly. Yes. So visiting children in the local community, which is really lovely. So we hope to perhaps, depending on how this goes, it would be really, really great to sort of roll it out a little bit more across the estate. And then finally, this is a project that I'm less close to, but wanted to report on. We're talking about Dyson Cancer Centre. So if any of you have gone past the main entrance of the hospital recently, you will see that there's an enormous building site outside, and that is effectively the Dyson Cancer Centre. Really what I'm communicating here is the sustainability credentials of this building, and the fact that we've committed to all our new buildings to be BREEAM excellent. So BREEAM is it's basically an assessment certification scheme for sustainable buildings, and it's widely recognised, I would say globally. So it's a really, really good thing to sort of direct or guide the design process and also operation of the building. So it looks into sustainable sourcing of materials, the use of energy and water in its operational phase, and of course the environmental impacts of the construction phase. So really looking at sort of whole life environmental performance. So yeah, a few things that they are putting into the design. So it's got PV panels to generate on-site energy, enhanced external spaces, so lovely green space for patients to walk around in, for staff to have a breather in, which will be lovely. Again, the energy use and everything will be is being modelled and will be highly efficient. And of course, for hot days, which is probably more often than not now, there'll be some solar film on the windows, which will mean that the sun won't make things so hard for people to work in and sit in a hot room, basically. I think one thing I really like about this project, and actually about the hospital in general, is that there is quite a lot of focus on patient experience, and particularly the art installations that they'll be putting into the cancer centre, like sculptures, murals, etc., but also across the entire estate. I don't know if any of you have actually been to the hospital, but if you walk the halls, there are pictures and there's artwork everywhere, which is a real delight to see, and I think it brings a smile to the face. So last slide. Don't really want to end on a downer, but hey ho. So at the end of the day, as you can see, there are lots of things to think about in terms of decarbonising an estate. It's not straightforward, and there are lots of considerations and decisions to make. And I think the most important thing is to acknowledge them and to perhaps figure out either alternative ways to get to the end goal, or think of or plan B, etc. So really our barriers to decarbonisation, I'd say number one is money. Our heat decarbonisation plan is going to be around sort of the 30 million mark. It's quite a lot, and getting financing for that through the public sector is going to be a real challenge. So it's looking at it in a different way, so in little chunks perhaps, and doing little projects, for example. Again, very importantly, the hospital is a public service and it has to function. That's it. So the maintenance backlog is of high priority, and understandably so, the hospital has to work. Again, I was talking a little bit about the requirements of external infrastructure to be able to support any decarbonisation that we do on site. So for example, we would require much more electricity than it says here. We currently have 2.7 megawatts of electricity on site. We need another 5.5, and if we implement that heat decarbonisation plan, we'd need a lot more as well. But to do that, we need to then talk to our external energy distributor and be like, right, can you give us that electricity? And they then need to be like, oh, well, let me check. I need to now look and see if I can provide that electricity to you. So there's a bit of a domino effect going on. These are all things that need to be considered. And also, of course, there's the financing of that as well. So lots to consider. And yeah, I think really the last one is there are so many fantastic technologies that are still waiting to come onto the market. I'm always banging on about hydrogen, but there are loads of other things that can be done. So it's difficult to see whether there's a waiting game or you just crack on, depending on what works for your estate. But it would be really interesting to see what happens next and what is upscaled and the timings of those. So that's everything from me. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Kate. That sounds hugely hopeful. So we'll take questions in the room. For our Zoom audience, hi. Could you please submit your questions via the chat facility of Zoom? And we will get to those in a moment. All right, questions in the room. Could I ask you to put the microphone somewhere near your chin so that the Zoom audience can hear your question? Then we don't have to repeat it and keep stopping. So who's first? Thank you.
Yeah, cool. I had a question regarding the transport. I know buses are a big issue at the moment in Bath, and I know from the university, one of the buses, the 22, was stopped and has major issues last year. What can the hospital do to help that, if anything, and what would they do? Yeah.
I would say, so really good question. And it's a big topic at the hospital, because I think everybody's so reliant on them, particularly because of, I suppose, lack of parking really in Bath as well, and at the university. It's all about getting people around a table and talking, and possibly, yeah, I mean, I've had a recent meeting with talking about this sort of thing, providing a bus service, and I think it's about getting them around a table, talking to the right people, so getting the council, getting the bus company, other anchor organisations who are interested in the service that they might provide, and being like, you know, we're all here, we're interested in that, and find a way to make it a benefit to everybody, a win situation to everybody. Usually it starts with money. So, you know, if you did want to put on another bus service, for example, how much is that bus company going to profit from the new line, for example, a new route, for example, and then you can use also back up with social value and environmental as well. And possibly a way I would advise, but not necessarily the only way to look at it. Okay.
Thank you very much for the presentation. There's a lot of work that you're doing, so it's good to see that. I'm sorry. It's not great.
I was saying thank you very much for this presentation. There's so much that I personally have learned, and there's a lot of work that you and your team are doing in the background. What I wanted to understand is from what I was getting, there's a lot of focus on water, electricity, energy, sustainability. And for RUH, do you guys also have focus on the human aspect of sustainability in terms of equality, quality work environment, mental health, the other side of sustainability as well?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Ultimately, the sustainability team at RUH are focused on the environmental first. I spoke a little bit about the social value that the initiatives can bring to social value and to that sort of thing. However, we have a separate individual who deals with equality. And we work together. But so it's not necessarily in our remit, but it's not being dealt with. It sits with somebody else in the organization.
Thank you. It's a brilliant question. My name's Alison Ryan. I'm the chair at the RUH. So probably in a slightly better position than Katie to talk about that. But there's a whole area of sustainability around our patients and their families, and whether they're managing with the resources they've got that we can help them with, because it helps us. So just for one example, if we can work and support, and we do with our family service, I was with our family service this morning, children who come to us, and they come with respiratory disease, and we realize that they come with respiratory disease because the families can't afford to heat the houses. So the houses have mold and the children get really bad asthma. And the statistics are that 73% of the children who die in pediatric intensive care from respiratory disease come from the lowest two quintiles of the population. So if we as a hospital can point them towards their own sustainability, where they can get help from, where they can get grants from, where they can use their own energy better, then maybe the children won't be so ill, and that saves the children from suffering, but it also saves us a lot of effort and money. So that's just one example, but we're seeing increasingly that working on sustainability, on pollution, air quality in the centre of Bath, the air pollution goes up and it's a hot day. Our increase in accident and emergency attendance is 23%. That's 23% more people turning up on any of those terribly hot days because they simply can't breathe. And so it's in our interest to work on transport with the local authority to improve air quality. So we're seeing it as all one thing now. But it's a brilliant question.
Thank you.
That's
Thanks,
a very lovely holistic thing. We're now going to go over to one of the questions from our Zoom audience. So over to Ollie, our brilliant technician, to read it out.
Any hope of reducing the amount of household and low-level hazardous waste generated by clinical activities at all?
Sorry, it was about waste, but I didn't get much else. Sorry.
It's about reducing the amount of low-level and hazardous waste that clinics by clinical activity.
What's the actual question? Sorry.
That is it.
What action are we taking? Right, okay, apologies.
Yeah, what action is the RUH taking to reduce those?
No, it's fine. Oh, yeah, okay. So we've committed in our green plan that we are reducing our single-use plastic one item at a time. It takes a long time to get that into the system because it involves probably a change in the procurement of that product. So it's not going to be an instant thing, but it's certainly happening. We have a waste team which is entirely dedicated to waste at the RUH, and they've got all types of different vesicles and procedures for different types of clinical waste. So in terms of the management of that waste, it's incredibly well looked after. In terms of reducing materials, thus reducing waste, again, it's just about very slowly educating those teams and getting those sustainability champions engaged to see where they can perhaps order a little bit less, do some stock taking in that regard, but also look at where materials can be reused instead of thrown away, such as single-use plastics. And that's really across the board, and it's an ongoing project which is happening in the background. I think for example, our surgical team are looking into reusable surgical hats instead of single-use plastic ones. I spoke to them about that today. So just little bits. Again, it's about getting those clinical teams who understand what they need, when and how, what this tool thing, product, material needs to do. And they can then make a decision as to perhaps what they'd like to change to, and they can come to us in sustainability for some advice, and we can do a little assessment on that and see if it would be appropriate to then go forward and change the procurement processes around that.
Right, thank you for that. Could I switch over to travel?
Yeah.
When I worked as a researcher at the RUH, I was very pleased to cycle to work, and all the cycle racks you've got there, very satisfactory. But a cycling buddy of mine, part of Walk, Ride, Bath, was saying that apparently entrance 3 is still not cycling enabled. And what plans do you have for improving that?
So interesting that you raised that point. We've had a number of people talk about entrance 3 at the RUH. It's a one-way entrance, and it has parking on it. It also serves parking for a school on one side and a community centre on the other side. Really, we've looked at it quite hard, and we've been round it with a consultant and somebody from the council to see how it could, if at all, be changed into, let's say, a part of it could be created into a cycle path, or what they wanted was actually it to be dual flow. And it's a very tight entrance. To be honest with you, in terms of dual flow, it's not possible because it's actually not safe. No. So that is, I think, where we are pretty much drawing the line, because it is on our estate. We will be responsible for that rider if they did happen to come upon something. So we've had to we've thought about it long and hard, and that is sort of our verdict. So yes, it will remain one way.
Good. I really didn't see the problem, since cycling means that you can get anywhere fairly fast and easily, that you've got entrances 1 and 2 perfectly safe. I will take that back to him. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Now over to you for your question.
I know you said you're a little further from this field, but it's a two-part question. In terms of like the actual buildings on the site, because I saw the stats for the new one you've got, how much are you focused on retrofit of the existing stuff against like building new, and further to that, like how much consideration do you put into like increasing demand for the hospital and like the extra services you'll need to account for that?
Okay, so I'll do the second part first, if that's okay. So in terms of demand, the Cancer Centre, I think, is quite exemplary of where we're putting in place new building, which is efficient and as environmentally friendly as possible to fit that demand. So that is, in terms of new buildings, really, I don't know, I don't think we have many plans for any further new buildings, mainly due to space, to be honest with you. In terms of retrofit, we've got, this all fits into our heat decarbonisation plan. There's a lot of building fabric upgrades that we would have to do, which would ensure that there was more insulation in the buildings. That is an enormous piece of work and will be extremely expensive. So in terms of, but is, retrofit, balancing out retrofit and new building versus, in terms of financial, but also then in terms of if you just wanted to knock it all down, and then in terms of carbon emissions, it's difficult to sort of say, but I would say that really the retrofit is likely the way to go. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah, so really lots and lots of retrofitting is being done currently, just slowly behind the scenes.
That's very encouraging, and as we're all doing in our own homes. Right, over to another question from our Zoom audience.
If finance is the biggest barrier, to what sense is that a choice of what to spend on as opposed to funds that cannot be spent on the sustainability agenda, and how are those choices made?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
If finance is the biggest barrier, to what sense is that a choice of what to spend on as opposed to funds that cannot be spent on the sustainability agenda, and how are those choices made?
No, I can take it. I'm just trying to figure out what it's trying to say. So what I think it's asking is what decisions financially do we make so that we spend money on sustainability rather than not? Really, it's looking at the whole project from afar. I think the example I'm going to take is, let's say the Dyson Centre. So you're looking at the whole project, you're looking at construction, you're looking at operation, how much it's going to cost while it's in use. And then, of course, if you can and have the technology to do so, looking at the disposal or decommissioning, if you like, and really putting that all together and comparing that design against what you might to another design, really, I suppose. And really that would probably likely influence if the money would be spent on that, or if it was to be spent on something cheaper, if it was possible to spend that money there. So sorry, a bit of a garbled answer, but I think it would be a weighing up scenario, lots of options analysis to see if it would be feasible and making a decision. Yeah.
Thanks. This is Alison Ryan again from the RUH. In the last 2 or 3 years, we've probably lost all control of our capital budgets. It's now pretty well dictated by government what we have, and it's not even really enough to keep the place watertight at the moment. So our backlog maintenance is currently £60 million just to keep the place watertight and safe. So investment in all the things we want to do, including just expanding things that will give us better safety for patients, is now pretty well impossible. So the Treasury is sitting on virtually every investment. And that has been very frustrating for everybody trying to make progress in this, especially when that investment would lead to savings in the future. But right at the moment, the financial situation nationally is what gives money into the NHS. And it's a very, very frustrating time. The happy days of being able to plan a cancer centre are long gone for us.
Thank you for that. Do we have any more questions in the room?
Hello, I'm Chrissy. I'm one of the paediatricians working at the RUH.
Hi.
I've got a question about, well, for you, what advice would you, what advice do you have for teams working within the RUH who want to undertake sustainability projects? You mentioned things like champions. What advice would you give us if we have an idea in mind where we want to promote a particular project that's close to our hearts?
Do you work at the RUH?
I do.
Okay, so there are a variety of things that you can do. Firstly, you can get in touch with the sustainability team because we have a staff suggestions board that we look at every week. And usually a lot of those things get implemented. I've just ordered a couple of water dispensers because people were wanting some water dispensers around the site so people can fill up their water bottles. We've got loads of different projects going on which are suggested by staff. So that's one thing that you can do. If you didn't necessarily want to go to us, you could literally do your own research and crack on. It would be great to know what you're doing so that we could report it and celebrate it. Other things that you can do. So we've got various sort of two main, the sort of behavior change programs. So I'm not quite sure if they would be what you wanted to do, but I'll just tell you anyway.
May I give you an example?
Yeah.
Of a project that we would potentially like to do for it, and it's quite a. Can I give you an example of something that we'd like to do? So, for example, a simple thing in our department would be just to promote breastfeeding, because breastfeeding over infant formula is a very sustainable form of feeding babies, and it's cost effective, and it has financial benefits for our families and for the hospital, as well as having a much greener carbon footprint. So how would we go about promoting breastfeeding in our hospital if that's what we wanted to do?
You went a bit muffled at the end. What would you like?
Yes.
What would you like to happen for that to come into fruition? What would you like? Would you like a room, or how would you like it to be implemented?
That's also what I was saying, why I'd like to know from you, how can we throughout the hospital promote breastfeeding so that we can help support our families?
Okay, I mean, there's a sort of
make those choices.
That is you make a massively good point. And I know this subject matter has come up a lot before, so it's good to hear that again. I think there's two things that can happen. I think the messaging that you provide to your to the staff who've got children and want to breastfeed, and also to patients who want to breastfeed, to encourage them to do so. You can put you can make that a sustainable thing if you would like, or you can make it a financial thing because you're not buying as much food, etc. You can make it a health thing as well. So I think in terms of sustainability, yes, there's an element of reason, but I think there's loads of other sort of reasons you can bring to your cohort which will be able to encourage that. I think it's great. Really, I would say in terms of at the hospital, you're very welcome to come and sit down with us and talk through what you require from a sustainability point of view. And there's also our comms team who can help spread the message when we've spoken a little bit, I suppose. So I think we probably leave it at that at the moment. But yeah.
That sounds great. Question over here, good.
Thank you. Sort of follows on a little bit from that last question in terms of at the very beginning, I think you talked about how patient care is delivered, for example, maybe digital appointments rather than people traveling to the hospital. The breastfeeding example is a similar one where it's maybe about those scope 3 emissions, the ones you may be able to influence. So I was just interested in whether you see as part of your job to try and do that engagement with the public and how you might want to do that. The reason I'm asking is because I'm involved in a group called Climate Hub Bath and North East Somerset. And one of the things we try to do is engage with people and organisations. And, you know, healthcare is such a huge theme that it's, you know, in discussing with people, whether it's travel or all those other things. I don't know, do you see that as part of your remit as well?
Sorry, I'm not too sure exactly.
Oh, I suppose the basic question is, you did mention at the beginning about the need for lots of engagement with the public and patients. So were you trying to, through your job, reduce those scope 3 type emissions, or are you really just focusing on the scope 1 and 2?
We are focusing on the scope 3 emissions, absolutely. Of those, there is a certain place where we have to stop in terms of our scope, our general scope of our emissions, because otherwise we would be involved in absolutely everything and it would be impossible to do the job properly. I think in terms of, if I use transport as an example, at the moment we have a non-patient travel plan. We don't have a patient travel plan. However, through our non-patient travel plan, there's a byproduct of the benefits that come from that, as I discussed earlier, in terms of bus availability, etc., which will then of course feed into the wider public as well. So I think from that point of view, we would influence in that regard. Does that answer your question?
Right. Any more questions? One more in from the Zoom audience. Good.
You spoke of a shared officer with Baines. Could you elaborate on that? What's their purpose? When do they start? What sort of projects are you hoping to get done with them?
Very good question. Ultimately, we would be looking for them to really coordinate travel between all the different anchor organizations across the city. So there is a smooth running service of, let's say, of buses, but it will also, the role will feed into absolutely everything else. It will feed into parking, car use, EV chargers, walking infrastructure, cycling infrastructure. So I can't specifically say exactly what projects that they would be doing, but it is likely to be one of those roles where they get heavily involved in what's going on in Bath, how it runs in terms of its mobility, and be able to make some real progress in terms of improving movement around the city.
I've heard some very good things about the improvements you're making to parking, etc. So congratulations, and do carry on with all of that. Are there any more Zoom questions?
So this seems to be a follow-on from the breastfeeding conversation. We would like breastfeeding champions across the RUH, spaces to breastfeed across the site, make breastfeeding more visible generally. Also would like to audit the waste from breast pump usage and formula milk use. Would we work with the waste team for this initiative?
What was the last bit of that?
Would we work with the waste team for this initiative of the waste from breast pumps and formula milk use?
Who would she speak to about improving or monitoring the waste from breast pump usage and formula usage? Because there is quite a fair amount of waste from that.
I'm not 100% sure. It's not my area, but I would probably start with the maternity department and then I would likely see where those objects, how they would be managed in terms of waste. And then go from there, really.
Back to the first bit in repeat.
We would like breastfeeding champions across the RUH spaces to breastfeed across the site, make breastfeeding more visible generally. Also would like, and then, yeah, sorry, it's just what I've got written here. That's spread out, so.
Sorry, was that a question? Sorry, I didn't.
Can you encourage breastfeeding champions, and can you put more chairs around and to labeled breastfeeding, please, that kind of thing?
I can certainly look into it.
Would that suit you? Excellent. Right. Any more questions in the room? No. In that case, thank you very much indeed. Can we put our hands together to say thank you very much?
Thank you.